Marina had not planned for adventure that morning. She only wanted quiet. The week had drained her in ways she could not put into words, leaving her body heavy and her mind restless. Saturday rose with pale golden light, carrying the faint promise of peace. She laced her boots with slow, deliberate care, her hands steady though her heart felt anything but. This was her ritual, her refuge. Stepping into the forest where responsibilities and noise could not follow. At her side waited Baxon, her steadfast companion. He was a large dog, strong and steady, his coat shifting in russet shades as the morning sun touched him. When Marina clipped on his leash, his tail swept the floor, eyes bright with the kind of anticipation only dogs carry. Together they had walked these paths countless times. She knew where the oaks surrendered to firs, where streams whispered through dry summers, where the air was always cool under the canopy. The forest greeted her as it always did, with the scent of pine needles and earth, with the chorus of distant birds, with the sigh of branches swaying above. Marina breathed deeply, feeling the stale weight of the week slip from her shoulders. Each step was familiar, comforting. Baxon trotted beside her, occasionally glancing back to reassure himself she was near, ears pricking at every rustle. He was her guardian as much as her companion, steady and loyal. That was why she noticed the change immediately. Halfway along a trail she could have walked blindfolded. Baxon stopped, his body went rigid, ears sharp, eyes locked on the thicket to their left. A sound vibrated from deep in his chest, a low, warning growl she had rarely heard. Before she could soothe him, he lunged. The leash snapped taut, wrenching at her wrist before slipping free, and he vanished into the undergrowth. Baxon, her voice rang sharp in the stillness, echoing unnaturally among the trees. Panic surged through her. This dog, her anchor, never disobeyed like this. She chased him, branches clawing at her jeans, shadows shifting around her, until the undergrowth thinned and gave way to a small clearing. There she stopped. Her eyes locked on something that seemed torn from another world. A car. It crouched between the trees, sunken into moss and soil, its body sagging beneath the weight of years. Rust covered every surface. Vines and ivy clawed across its frame, climbing through cracks in the windows. One tire had sunk halfway into the earth, and from the hood rose a slender sapling, alive and thriving where metal had failed. Marina stared, disbelieving. The forest was her sanctuary, unchanging. She knew these trails, yet here, in its heart, was a machine swallowed by time. Baxon circled the vehicle, tail stiff, ears flattened. He pawed at the earth near the wheels, glancing back at her with an intensity that unsettled her. She approached slowly, heart thudding. The air around the car felt different, too still, too expectant. Brushing her fingers against the door handle, flakes of rust broke away, staining her palm red like dried blood. She pulled. The door resisted, sealed by age or perhaps simply locked. Wind stirred the branches overhead, and leaves rained down onto the hood, settling there as if in ceremony. Marina shivered. The car belonged to the forest now. To disturb it felt like trespass. That night, her sleep betrayed her. Rusted metal, vines, and opaque windows haunted her closed eyes. Each dream left her heart pounding, her mind restless. When dawn broke, she could no longer deny it. She had to return. The next day, armed with gloves and a flashlight, she stood once more before the car. She wiped grime from a window and shone her light inside. What she saw tightened her chest. The car was not empty. Dust lay thick across the dashboard, but objects lingered where lives had once paused. On the passenger seat rested a cracked leather bag. In the glove compartment, partly ajar, she glimpsed brittle letters and yellowed newspapers. On the back seat lay a pair of broken spectacles and a dented thermos. Absurd in their ordinariness, these were not discarded scraps. They were fragments of a life interrupted. Her stomach twisted. This was no ordinary abandonment. She forced the driver's door, and it groaned open with a shriek that shattered the clearing's silence. Baxon barked sharply, as if warning her. Inside, the air was stale with decay, thick with mold. Dust swirled as her beam cut across cobwebs stretched like fragile curtains. Then she saw it. Fresh mud streaked across the floor. Her heart stumbled. The car had been untouched for decades, or so she thought, yet here was proof that someone had stepped inside. Recently, the realization pressed down on her chest like stone. She pulled back, scanning the silent trees, every shadow watching her, every rustle a warning. The forest was not empty. That night, exhaustion brought no peace. In her dreams, she sat inside the car, its windows fogged, breath thick in the air though no one else was visible. A presence hovered just beyond the glass, unseen but near. She wiped at the condensation again and again, but the forest outside stayed blurred, as if refusing her clarity. She woke gasping, heart hammering, and knew with certainty she would return again. The third morning came with unease braided into her resolve. The path into the woods felt narrower, the shadows deeper. Baxen stayed close, ears flicking, body tense. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath as she approached the clearing. The car was there, unchanged, yet something new awaited her. On the driver's seat lay a key. It was brass, dulled with tarnish, yet it gleamed faintly where light filtered through the branches. Marina froze. Yesterday she had searched every inch of the car. That key had not been there. Someone had come since, someone who still claimed this place. She picked it up with gloved fingers, heavier than she expected, the teeth jagged and worn, and in that moment, the forest no longer felt like her refuge. It felt like a threshold she had crossed, into a story that was not hers, yet would not let her go. The abandoned car was no longer an object of curiosity, it was a presence, a secret, and Marina, whether she wished it or not, was now entangled in its gravity. Along its stem were faintly stamped letters, nearly rubbed away with age but not entirely illegible. They looked like initials, or perhaps the fragment of an address. Marina squinted, tracing them with her thumb, feeling a strange shiver climb up her spine as she realized this was no random object. This key belonged somewhere. It had once fit into a lock that could open a door, perhaps even a door not far from where she stood now. Her mind leapt back to the bag, the broken glasses, the thermos half sunk in the weeds. Each piece was a fragment of a life scattered and left behind. But the key was different. It was not discarded. It was a link, a bridge to something outside the forest, a piece that tied everything together. Someone had placed it here deliberately, as though inviting her to follow its path. Marina tucked it into her pocket and glanced around the clearing once again. The trees seemed to lean closer now, their trunks looming like silent witnesses to secrets long buried. The canopy overhead blocked much of the sunlight, leaving fractured shadows that shifted with every stir of the breeze. Baxen growled softly, his chest vibrating under her hand, his gaze locked on a dense cluster of bushes near the edge. Marina followed his eyes but saw nothing beyond the natural sway of leaves in the wind. Still, the unease she had been trying to ignore returned with brutal force, prickling across her skin. She had the distinct impression of being watched. Her pulse quickened as she began to circle the car again, her movements slower this time, every sense sharpened. That was when she noticed the signs she had missed before. Branches snapped clean, their wood still pale and wet against the bark, the earth disturbed in uneven patches, pressed down by something heavier than falling leaves. Boots. Whoever came here had done so not long before her arrival. She crouched, brushing aside damp leaves with trembling fingers until she uncovered a clear footprint. The tread was deep, the edges crisp, and within its hollow still clung a sheen of moisture. Her throat tightened. She was not imagining it. She was following directly in the wake of another. Baxen whined, tugging lightly against the leash, his body taut with unease. His entire stance begged her to leave, to turn back before it was too late. This was a dog accustomed to the forest, a creature that usually carried himself with fearless authority in its depths. Yet now his ears flattened, his muscles trembled with restrained urgency, his instincts screaming retreat. Marina stroked his head absently, her palm brushing over his soft fur as her thoughts churned in conflict. Every instinct told her to walk away, to leave the clearing and its secrets untouched, to retreat into the safety of familiar paths. And yet, the key. The key in her pocket felt impossibly heavy, a physical anchor chaining her to the mystery. It was a promise of answers she didn't know she had been searching for until this very moment. As the afternoon light shifted, lengthening the shadows into dark spears that pierced the ground, Marina realized how far she had let herself slip into obsession. The forest no longer felt like refuge. It had transformed into a labyrinth of questions, and at its center stood this relic of steel and silence. She wondered if others in town knew of it, if whispers still lingered about old tragedies, about disappearances swallowed by the trees. Had she simply never listened closely enough? The silence pressed hard against her ears until even the smallest sounds seemed amplified. The slow creak of swaying trees, the snap of some unseen animal in the underbrush, the quick, shallow rhythm of her own breath. She forced herself to step back from the car, to put space between her and its suffocating presence. Yet she did not leave. She lingered at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed as though daring the forest to reveal its truth. But the trees stayed mute. When no answer came, she turned reluctantly down the path, guiding Baxon back toward home. Still, the sense of eyes trailing her did not fade. More than once, she glanced back, heart-hammering as she caught movement, just the faintest ripple across the shadows. Each time, it dissolved before she could be certain. By the time Marina reached her house, the key had consumed her thoughts entirely. She laid it on the kitchen table, its dull brass catching the dying glow of evening. The faint letters carved into its surface seemed to pulse in the shifting light, whispering secrets she couldn't yet grasp. If she deciphered them, if she uncovered where they led, then perhaps the truth of the car, the bag, the footprint would unfold. But with her hunger for answers rose something darker, fear. Whoever had left it wanted her to find it. She was no longer an intruder who stumbled upon a relic, she had been invited. Sleep abandoned her that night. The house was too still, its walls too thin to hold back her unease. Every creak of its settling frame became a threat, every shift in the wind a whispered warning. She sat by the window with Baxon curled at her feet, staring out into the blackness of her yard, half convinced a figure stood among the trees watching. The key weighed heavy in her palm, its cold surface pressing against her skin, its edges biting as though to remind her this was no dream. The car was not a relic of the past, it was part of something ongoing. Alive. And so, a decision crystallized in her chest, sharp and immovable. She could not ignore this. She could not abandon the trail now, not when the forest itself seemed to press her forward. If she wanted to know what bound the car to this place, if she wanted to know who walked those paths in the cloak of night, she would have to return, not as a wanderer, not as a curious intruder, but as a watcher. Next time, she would come prepared. Marina extinguished the lamp, the key clenched tightly in her fist, and whispered into the darkness a vow she could not take back. Tomorrow night, she would wait, and when the figure returned, she would be there. The night of her decision arrived with a clarity that made Marina feel as though she had been moving toward this moment since the instant she first set foot in the clearing. The key lay on her bedside table all day, glinting dully whenever light struck it, a constant reminder of her vow. Every time her eyes strayed toward it, the tarnished brass caught the glow in a way that seemed purposeful, almost alive, as if it wanted her to remember. Her role was no longer passive. She had been chosen, summoned even, and now there was no turning back. When the sun finally dipped and the last threads of daylight bled into the horizon, she fastened her jacket, slipped a flashlight into her pocket, and clipped Baxon's leash to his collar. The dog hesitated at the threshold, ears twitching, his body taut with unspoken warning. He sensed her tension, mirrored it, yet he followed, loyal even against his better instincts. The streets behind them fell into silence. With every step, the glow of the town receded until only the chorus of nocturnal life remained. The forest at night was not the same place she had known by day. It was not merely darker, it was transformed, alive in a way that demanded vigilance. Branches cracked underfoot like splintered bones. The distant call of an owl echoed like a warning. The air was heavier, clinging to her skin with damp coolness, and every exhale misted faintly in front of her lips. Marina's pulse quickened, beating in her ears as she retraced the familiar trail. The car stood in her thoughts like a sentinel, the abandoned belongings, the footprint pressed deep into the earth, the key's promise of purpose, each detail replayed in her mind, looping endlessly, tightening around her like vines, and above all, the certainty that whoever kept this secret still walked these woods. Tonight, she would see them. When she reached the clearing, her heart pounded so loudly she feared it would betray her. The car loomed in the pale wash of moonlight, its frame glistening faintly with dew. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She moved to a cluster of trees near the edge, crouching low, pulling Baxon close to her side. The shepherd's muscles quivered, but he stayed quiet. his warm head pressed lightly against her arm, grounding her even as his unease radiated like a current. Marina steadied her breathing. Patience. She would need patience. Minutes stretched long and thin. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps, every flutter of wings like a whispered warning. Time itself seemed to warp, stretching into silence until she wondered if she had made a mistake. Then, a sound. At first so faint she thought it was her imagination. The crunch of deliberate steps on dry undergrowth. Then again, steady, growing closer. Her body tensed, every nerve sparking alive. From between the trees, a figure emerged. He moved with the assurance of someone who had walked this path countless times. Moonlight revealed his form, broad-shouldered, middle-aged, carrying himself with neither haste nor hesitation. There was a gravity about him, a quiet solemnity that froze Marina where she crouched. He stepped into the clearing without pause, approaching the car as though it were waiting for him. His hand reached for the door, and where Marina's desperate strength had failed days before, the lock yielded effortlessly beneath his touch. The door swung open. He slid inside, settling into the driver's seat with the ease of ritual, as though reclaiming a place he had never truly abandoned. From his coat he withdrew a small wooden box, placing it carefully on his lap. Then he bowed his head. Words followed, too soft for Marina to hear, but she could see the rhythm of them in his lips, feel the reverence in the air itself. She strained forward, her breath caught in her throat, torn between fear and awe. This was no act of hiding, it was mourning. The man lifted items from the box, one at a time. Photographs, perhaps, a ribbon, a trinket, a folded letter. Each object was held tenderly, examined in silence, then returned with deliberate care. His gestures carried the weight of memory, not guilt. His hands moved like someone piecing together fragments of a life lost. Understanding dawned on Marina, heavy and profound. The car was no relic of chance, it was a shrine. The broken glasses, the bag, the thermos, these were not discarded fragments. They were relics of a life that had ended here, each piece left to anchor memory in place. The key in her pocket grew heavier still. It was not hers to hold. It belonged to this man, to this grief, to this vigil carried out under moonlight and silence. She realized with sudden clarity that she had intruded upon something sacred. Her heart swelled with a complex ache, fear, respect, sorrow, and the sharp sting of humility. The footprints in the mud, the branches broken, the silence pressing in around her. These were not threats, not traps, but echoes of private devotion. Some truths, she understood, were not hers to solve, only hers to witness. The man lingered for a long time. At last he closed the box, returned it to his coat, and rested his hand against the steering wheel as though saying goodbye. Then he stepped out, closing the door with careful gentleness. He stood for a while, gazing at the car with an expression that carried both sorrow and peace. Before turning back into the trees, his footsteps faded until the forest reclaimed its silence. Marina did not move, not until the last echo of his presence dissolved into the night. Only then did she rise, her legs stiff, her heart still racing. She looked at the car, unchanged and yet utterly transformed by what she had seen. No longer just an abandoned machine, but a monument, a vessel of memory, as much alive in its grief as the man who kept it. With trembling fingers, she pulled the key from her pocket, its edges pressed into her skin, sharp and cold, a weight of meaning she no longer wanted to carry. Slowly, she stepped forward, through the half-open window. She laid it carefully on the driver's seat. The gesture felt right. A silent acknowledgement. The story was not hers to claim. She tugged Baxon's leash. The dog rose swiftly, eager to leave, muscles quivering with pent-up energy. Together, they retraced their steps through the forest. This time, Marina felt no pursuit, no invisible eyes tracking her. Instead, she carried with her a strange calm. The questions did not vanish, but they no longer clawed at her with hunger. Some mysteries, she realized, were not meant to be solved. Some belonged only to those who bore them into the forest's silent guardianship. By the time she emerged from the trees, dawn was breaking. The sky bled into shades of rose and gold, the city beyond still sleeping, unaware of the secrets rooted in the woods at its edge. Marina paused at the tree line, looking back one final time. She knew she would not return. The car would remain there, rusting slowly into the soil, but in her mind, it would always stand in moonlight, quiet, steadfast, a monument to love, loss, and memory's persistence. She turned and walked home, the leash firm in her hand, Baxon pacing steadily at her side. The forest had once offered her peace, then tested her with silence and fear, and now it had given her something deeper, respect for what lay beyond her understanding. Some doors were never meant to be opened, some stories were not hers to tell. And as the sun rose fully above the horizon, Marina felt the weight of the mystery lift, not leaving answers, but acceptance.
If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.